Welcome to Puck Pursuit. I'm your host, John Matisz, and this episode is presented by our friends at Under Armour, who caught up with Taylor Hall over the summer. You can check out their Q&A with Taylor Hall at underarmour.com. All right, on the line today is Jonathan Willis of The Athletic, and that's also Jonathan Willis on Twitter. First of all, John, how's it going, man?
Not too bad. Hopefully my voice is okay for everyone. My son brought home the plague, so I'm just getting over it, and I'm happy we were able to do this.
The plague. Yeah, I should mention we tried to record this Tuesday night, but now it's Wednesday night because of your voice. So fingers crossed that this all works out and you're able to get through it, because I want to try something different with you, a different format to this podcast. Kind of game show-esque. We'll go through 5 different topics, about 10 minutes per topic, and again, try and keep it nice and tight. When we hit the 10-minute mark, it's time to move on, and we're going to go around the horn a little bit here. What do you think, John?
Yeah, that works for me. I love game shows.
Okay. So you cover the Oilers, also the NHL at large for The Athletic, but there's a heavy impact or heavy reliance on the Oilers. So let's start with them. With the first game, over/under 90 points for the Oilers this season. Give me your thoughts.
See, now when you told me you set the over/under for 90, I was wondering if you did it because you read my my season preview where I put my over/under at 90 points. So
no, not at all. No.
Trying to answer the question is I'm gonna say the under, just because I think I had them in the range of 86 to 92, and so 89 would be the average of that, and that would be just technically on the under. I think they're going to get back a lot of what they lost last year, but this is still a flawed team, and a team that, beyond Connor McDavid, doesn't have a lot of scoring.
Well, and so they're 2-2 so far. They've had a weird start to the season, being in Germany, yes, and then being on the road, and then just all over the place. Probably the weirdest schedule out of any team so far. And obviously the talk of the Oilers through the first couple of weeks is Connor McDavid, and while it's a good story to an extent because he was in on all 9 of their first 9 goals, it's the underlying problem there is that they just don't have the depth, at least thus far. I guess we'll see how it all unfolds, but how do you view that? I mean, it's pretty incredible what he's done. I actually would chalk it up as a more impressive feat than what Austin Matthews has done through the first 7 games with the Leafs, even though that alone is pretty crazy. But the fact that McDavid is literally more or less doing this by himself is fantastic, but also a serious problem.
Yeah, it's the conundrum the Oilers have had for a while now. He's the best player on the planet. Whatever the Hart Trophy voting was last year, he was clearly, I thought, the best player in the NHL. And he's been phenomenal. He's been playing with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Ty Rattie, so they've sort of weaned him off Draisaitl. He's been able to drive this. I mean, Nugent-Hopkins is a good player, and I don't want to undersell Rattie, but he's been able to drive this by himself. And the reason they did it that way was because they wanted Draisaitl to drive his own second line. And so far, that just hasn't happened. We're at the point in the year now where the coach has started to shift the lines up, so we'll see if that results in any changes, because for the first 4 games, I guess, Draisaitl's been carrying along Milan Lucic and oh gosh, I'm blanking on his right wing. My goodness. Anyway, Milan Lucic and Kyler Yamamoto. So he's breaking in a raw rookie, and he's trying to resuscitate a career of a guy who had 1 goal after Christmas last year. So he hasn't been able to do that, and that's maybe one of those places where you go, well, that didn't work, but there are good reasons why it didn't work. And if they get Draisaitl some help, maybe they'll get that secondary scoring they so desperately need.
Yeah, the thing with the 90 points, it's hard to obtain, as a whole, especially when they had 78 last year, and it wasn't like a fluky 78 points. They had the 23rd worst goal differential, and they were 23rd in the league in points. So it sort of lines up that they were the 23rd best team in the league. But it's just hard because they're at an 82-point pace right now. And you think about making the playoffs is around 95. So saying that they were over 90 is saying they're basically a playoff team. So I mean, I personally maybe I put it too high. Maybe I should have said 85 because like even myself, I'm going 90 seems almost unattainable unless something really shakes loose here and someone comes out of nowhere like Puljujarvi. Maybe he ends up living up to his expectations. I don't know. There's pieces there but there's a little there's too many question marks around those pieces.
Well, let's talk about that goal differential a little bit because the way it happened is interesting to me and kind of why I have the team at 90 points. The Oilers had the worst power play in the NHL last year. Like Sidney Crosby's Penguins scored 10 goals an hour. McDavid's Oilers scored 5, and that's with Connor McDavid out there for the lion's share of those power play minutes. Like it's unfathomable that a McDavid-led power play would be that bad. If they were even an NHL median team, they would have been 15 goals better than they were last season, and that's half of their negative goal differential right there. And the penalty kill wasn't quite as atrocious, but it was quite bad as well, and it upticked in the last couple months of the season. So when I look at what happened last year, I look at the Oilers, I say, yeah, they're a break even, maybe a little bit worse than that at 5-on-5, but there's no way the power play and the penalty kill should both be as bad as they were, once again, not with the talent they have on the roster.
Yeah, also, I mean, Darnell Nurse has looked pretty good through the first 4 games. They're putting him out there a ton, 24 minutes. That's McDavid level minutes, which is kind of weird to say because McDavid's a forward, but what have you thought of Nurse and how the defense is shaking out? Because obviously that Sekera injury at the end of the offseason was devastating, even though that's a weird thing to say about anything to do with Andre Sekera.
Yeah, I think Nurse has been okay. It's funny because his minutes are so high, but he's almost been kind of a second pairing guy because when you look at the way the blue line minutes are concentrated, Klefbom and Larson are second and third, and Nurse's regular partners have been Russell and Benning, and they're quite a ways back. He's been solid, I think, but the problem is they still don't have 2 pairings they can lean on. Russell's been okay. Benning has had quite a bad start to the year, and behind them there just isn't much. Like they've been playing Jason Garrison, who like no disrespect, but he spent most of last year in the American League, and you have to wonder if he's an NHL player. Matt Benning's been trying to be a top 4 guy for a while and still doesn't look like he's there. Evan Bouchard is in the mix there too in the third pairing, and none of those guys really stand out as, like maybe Benning's a guy who can anchor a third pairing, but none of those guys really stand out as legit top 4 defensemen. So if they run into any more injury problems, they're going to be in real trouble, and they're really banking on Nurse, Klefbom, and Larson to all step forward, and so far the results have been kind of mixed.
Yeah, and I feel like relying on 3 guys to make a step forward is a lot to ask. Like I think we forget as analysts or even just coaches or managers, it's like not everything is going in the right direction all the time, right? So if Nurse has a year where he exceeds expectations or starts to move towards what we thought his ceiling was, maybe that doesn't happen for Larson. Maybe he stays put or regresses a bit, right? It's kind of hard to put so much on these defensemen that are left around after an injury or two, already a thin decor. I'm curious, what have you thought of Evan Bouchard? Because he's made it into 3 or 4 games, but hasn't played a ton. I would imagine he's pretty much only there for the reason of Sekera being out, and also you would assume that he's going to be sent back to London before the 10-game mark.
Just one quick comment on the expecting a bunch of guys to have good years. The thing about Klefbom and Larson is like Klefbom had shoulder surgery. Larson's father died last year, so there were some reasons to think those guys were maybe underperforming what their actual talent level is. But I do agree with your broader point. On Bouchard, I think he's here for the 9-game mark. I think what's going to happen is he's going to be returned to junior, because to me he's been very impressive, but not regular NHL defenseman impressive. And when he goes down, if that is in fact what happens, I think they'll bring Ethan Bear up. He had a very impressive camp and kind of got squeezed out because he had a waiver exemption, and they could send him down and know that 10 games later they could bring him back, which wasn't a luxury they had with Bouchard. Yeah,
no, you make a great point about Klefbom and Larson there. Overall, like if you can handicap the worser or the better of the 2 evils, the defense core or the wingers up front? Like, which situation is more dire on the Edmonton Oilers right now, like short term and long term?
Short term, the wingers. Long term, I'm going to say defense, because they have some good defensemen in system. If Bouchard ends up being a number one guy, then they're in good shape. But even for a 10th overall pick, I think that's a big ask, and it's a really big ask to have him do it in the next year or two. But right now, the wingers are what get to me, because there just isn't much scoring threat there. You've got Ryan Nugent-Hopkins converted to left wing basically because they needed somebody at that position, and you try and think of who's going to provide secondary scoring. Lucic had a terrible last half and is at an age where you wonder if he's dropping off. Tobias Reeder was their big offseason addition, and he's a good, useful player, but he's a third-line forward. Long-term, Yamamoto and Puljujarvi should solve this problem to a large extent, but whether they can do it this year, I mean, that's anybody's guess, and so far it hasn't really looked like it.
Yeah, I wonder what happens with Nugent-Hopkins over the course of this season, because he's with McDavid now, but you give it a long enough stretch of maybe that not working out or just being okay, and all of a sudden the line starts shuffling, and the Oilers are back to square one, finding someone that works with McDavid long term, because he's filtered through a fair amount of wingers over his short career so far, really to no fault of his own. But if you look back and maybe even just look at the Nugent Hopkins and Ratty duo right now too, out of all those pairings that have been with McDavid, which one do you think has been the best fit? And I don't know what your long-term thought is on what to do with McDavid being this force and finding just the right guys that fit.
Well, Draisaitl was a great fit. He was, but the problem is you take Draisaitl off that second line and you're so top heavy. The Oilers don't have the talent to overcome it. If we're still talking about a team that has Taylor Hall and Jordan Eberle on the roster, sure, play Draisaitl on McDavid's right wing, but they aren't that team anymore. So they have to have Draisaitl, I think, in the second line center position. I don't see any way around it. And because of that, the thing about the Nugent-Hopkins Ratty pairing is they played the last dozen or so games of last year with McDavid and looked pretty good there too. And it's one of those situations where Nugent-Hopkins is a good offensive player, but he's not a great one. He's kind of a multi-talented guy and a guy who excels on special teams more so than 5-on-5. So tying him to McDavid, you're not losing, you are losing some from the middle six of your lineup, but you're not losing as much as you are when you have Draisaitl in that slot. And because Ratty is so cheap and so offensively gifted, Ratty's got some flaws, but he's very good from the offensive zone blue line in. To me, this is a way around sort of Edmonton's weaknesses on the wing. Because you have Ratty there, it means you can use a guy like Reeder or a guy like Puljujarvi elsewhere in the lineup. I think just when I was in Edmonton for the preseason, and the impression I got is that the coach is quite wedded to this current first line, that he's a fan of it, and I expect we'll see it for quite a while. And of course, the fact that it's worked going out of the gate is something that's going to make it continue as well.
All right, moving on. Second game. This one's real or fake. So we're talking Carolina Hurricanes here. Real or fake? Are they legitimate, or is their early season success a mirage?
I think they're legitimate because I do think they're legitimate in a lot of ways. You come back to the same question with Carolina this year as we have, I think, every year for the last 3 or 4 years, and that's goaltending. Curtis McElhaney and Peter Mrazek is not a duo that inspires a ton of confidence. And, even when Scott Darling comes back, you wonder how he's going to look given that he's been injured and given how poor his season last year was. So I think what Carolina's doing at 5-on-5 is for real. I think this is legitimately a playoff team in terms of talent and ability. But whether or not they get the goaltending to get them to that position, I don't know.
Yeah, they're a really intriguing team, on so many different levels. First of all, the new-ish owner, Tom Dundon, and his disruptive personality or style. You have a new GM in Don Waddell. How much power does he have? That sort of subplot the new coach, Rod Brindamore, who's come in and said, hey, we're not going to be the Hurricanes of old. We're not going to get pushed around. We're going to go to the net hard. All these cliches. But and then you think about the actual way that they play on the ice, and it's like the problem with them over the years, or at least under Bill Peters to an extent, was that they didn't go hard to the net. They threw a bunch of pucks on net. They maybe didn't get enough screens. Like there was something going on there in the Bill Peters era where they dominated with Corsi, but they were one of the lowest scoring teams. So there's something missing there. And I don't know if Brindamore has found it. I don't know if his new philosophy of hustle, of heart, all that kind of stuff, which has been pretty entertaining when you factor in the fact that he's allowed the team to have a little fun after games, jumping against the glass. And all those shenanigans, like there's a certain level of fun happening in Carolina right now. But from an actual playing style perspective, it seems like they're doing something different. I mean, they're still racking up a crazy amount of shot attempts, but it seems like they at least have a few more players that can be in and around the net to finish versus being on the perimeter all the time. And another thing of note is Sebastian Aho has looked unreal to start the season. Like he kind of reminds me of Artemi Panarin, where the creativity and the speed through the neutral zone, like it. For some reason, I get images of Panarin when I see him playing, and he's been very impressive in the early going. So we'll see if that continues, but it's fun to see, right? I mean, this is a team that's kind of just flailed in the wind for a lot of years, and they've been out of the playoffs for 9 seasons. That's a long time in a league that promotes parity. So, if I don't know if I'm rooting for them to get in the playoffs, but I at least want them to like do something. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, finally you're relevant. Now let's see what you can actually produce over a full season.
Well, and just the NHL as a whole, like hockey culture is so conservative and toned down as a rule. I like having Tom Dundon come into the league and shake things up a little bit. I like that he's a little bit outrageous by hockey standards. I like that Carolina seems like they're focused on being a fun team. If you're in a quote unquote unconventional market, you should be like that. And they've got a lot of good young talent. I think this is the best defense core Carolina's had since. I don't even know. I'd take this defense core over their 06 Cup winning defense core. I'll tell you that right now. Like they've got 3 really good pairings. They've got a top 6 that's really an interesting mix. Like you mentioned Aho, and I mean he's been unreal. It's crazy to think he had 65 points a year ago, and outside of Carolina, people didn't really know that. It's like Alexander Barkov was a few years ago, where people didn't know how good of a player he was because he played for not a very good team and not a very big market. But he's getting that attention now. Jordan Staal is an excellent second-line center. And you mentioned going to the net. I wonder how much the addition of specific players like Ferland and Fogle has changed just the way they play. You could maybe make an argument that those guys have an outsized contribution compared to their immediate talent levels, just because of playing style and the way they mesh with the skilled winger centers they're playing with.
Yeah, and actually, I wrote a story the other day about Warren Fogle.
I read that.
Yeah, so a lot of that was touching on, his playing style and how he's not coming along as this guy who's crashing and banging and can't skate and sort of the old school version of a power forward. He's coming along as a guy who can skate, who can finish when he's close to the net, and who has no problem killing penalties and out hustling. All that, again, all that sort of intangible hockey stuff. But I mean, when I talked to Mike Vellucci, their assistant GM for that story, he was pretty adamant that, I've been preaching this internally for a long time. Like, we need these type of guys. And when you look up and down their former rosters, they're kind of devoid of even Jordan Martinook. He's looked pretty good, and he's a penalty killer too. Like, it's almost like what Justin Bourne was talking about this summer. Justin Bourne, your colleague at the Athletic, he wrote a story about the Maple Leafs maybe going too far in the direction of skill, like getting. Obviously acquiring these insanely skilled players, but and that's all well and good, and that's the way that the league has gone, and that's, you know, that's the direction you should generally go. But he brought up the point, like, but at the end of the day, do you need at least a little bit of, you know, a little bit of jam, a little bit of quote unquote toughness? And I thought of that when I've been watching the Hurricanes this year. It's like there's a little more sort of intimidation factor, and just finishing around the net. Like, if you want more goals, put guys in front of the net and they'll get rebounds, or off the rush they'll be able to finish a little bit more often. So yeah, in doing that Fogle piece, I definitely learned a lot about the Hurricanes. And also before I did it, I was thinking this roster with, you know, with what they did in the summer, you know, bringing in Dougie Hamilton, drafting Andrei Svechnikov, shoring up their goaltending to a little bit. Cam Ward's gone and Petr Mrazek is in. Like, that's an upgrade right there. So I was already thinking that this team would you know, take a step in the right direction to some extent. But so far, I'll say pleasantly surprised with the product.
Yeah. Well, and this is the defense core for me. Like, when you talk about summer acquisitions, Dougie Hamilton's a guy who scores really high among, you know, sort of analytics geeks, people like me, but not so high in terms of traditional hockey value. But you look at that blue line, they added Hamilton, they added DeHaan. Those are major additions, and they didn't pay major addition prices for them. And they've got, I don't know, 6 guys out of 6 guys who can move the puck from the back end. Like, that's got huge value, and I don't think it's something that the Hurricanes have had before, and not just in terms of moving the puck from the back end, but also in terms of being able to defend. I think they're a better group than they've been in years past. Maybe the most interesting thing to me about Carolina this year is that sort of Bill Peters effect, where they've got the shot metrics in their favor, but the goals were not. It's still in a place on the power play and the penalty kill. Like, they're generating a ton of shots on the power play, but they're not getting goals. Their PK shot metrics are good, but they're getting killed on goals against. So, you know, maybe we're a little too early to say that they've really turned the page, or maybe this is a small sample size. We're only so far into the season, and it'll get ironed out as the year goes on. I don't think they're going to be able to continue doing what they've done so far if they don't get the special teams figured out. But that's an area that, you know, you can't really go off 5 or 6 games and come to any definitive conclusions. Yeah,
they're 8% on the power play right now, 64% on penalty killing. I think they're last in penalty killing. So, despite my my attention to Warren Fogle and Jordan Martinook and those guys, like, it hasn't worked out as a whole on the penalty kills. So they have some issues there. I guess you know, if at least you have your 5-on-5 game figured out. I think that, you know, considering how much time you spend 5-on-5, I think that they're if they're going to pick one or the other, special teams or even strength, they picked the right one to excel in early on. So yeah, 7 games in, I'm optimistic, but this team has let us down year after year after year. So we'll see.
Yeah, every year is the year you ask whether Carolina's for real, right? One of these years they will be.
Okay, we'll be back in 60 seconds after this brief word from our friends at Under Armour.
How do you get here? You have as much chance of being struck by lightning or winning the lottery as you do having a career as a professional hockey player. There are infinite early mornings and late nights. You need an army of people behind you. You have to work, and work some more. You need talent, fuel, and fire. The most important thing you need can't be seen at all.
All right, let's get going on our third game. I'm going to call this one This, That, and the Other Thing. So this is all about power plays, all about power play units specifically. Which unit would you rather have and why? And I'm talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Washington Capitals, and the San Jose Sharks. They're top units, which I'm sure you know all about, and everyone listening knows all about, because they're all, I mean, they all, I don't want to, overblow it, but they're all almost like historical units in terms of like the way they're built and the way that they're running right now. And again, sample size alert, but I mean, which one do you choose, John?
Does Toronto do we get to assume that Nylander's going to sign at some point with Toronto?
I'm going off by their current unit right now, which is Tavares, Kadri, Marner, Matthews, and Riley.
Okay. I think I'm going to take Washington for this year, just by the tiniest hair, and I'm going to do it because it's been consistently good for so long, and also because Ovechkin in the Ovechkin spot is so hard to beat. I mean, these are all phenomenal units, but to me, only Washington and Winnipeg, which is another outrageous power play one, have that one guy who in that one spot is just complete. The value is almost incalculable, and the way he sucks penalty kills to him and allows everybody else to do their thing. I love San Jose. I'd love them more if Thornton was healthy. I love Toronto, but they don't have, to me, that one guy who does what Ovechkin does, no matter, and not to take anything away from a very, very good unit. So that's sort of my reasoning and the one I would take.
Yeah. So far this year, that Washington unit of Oshie, Backstrom, Kuznetsov, Ovechkin, and Karlsson, 7 goals in 5 games. The Toronto unit that I mentioned before, 7 goals in 7 games. And then the Sharks unit, which everyone was all fired up about before the season started, 1 goal in 6 games. So you assume that San Jose will figure it out, or maybe they separate Karlsson and Burns. I don't know. That's the one to keep an eye on. But as it's currently constructed, there's a lot to like about Couture, Hertl, Pavelski, Burns, and Karlsson, at least on paper, right? I don't know what you've seen in the early going from that unit, but it hasn't worked out clearly as planned.
Well, the thing I like about the Sharks unit is when you've got Joe Thornton, because in terms of playmaking brilliance in the NHL, there are maybe 2 or 3 guys even in the same conversation with Joe Thornton even today. And if he is there, you have 3 really high-end right-hand shooters that he can pass to. The fact that he's been injured, I think, is part of the reason San Jose has kind of struggled a little bit out of the gate. And then you get into the Burns-Karlsson thing, where one of them essentially has to play a forward role because, I mean, it doesn't have to. You could have 2 guys out on the points, but I wonder how much in terms of their value is duplicated there, and whether one of them can be successful in another position. Like, to me, Burns is a guy, like I talked about Ovechkin, who would probably, you would think, thrive in that same role, but maybe hasn't been asked to do it in the past.
Yeah, and I should mention too that Evander Kane's been used on this unit, so there's a lot going on with this San Jose top unit, and it seems like a lot of experimenting, which you would expect from a team that has Joe Thornton out and Erik Karlsson in, at least for the time being. We'll see when Thornton comes back. But when you look at it from like a role perspective, Pavelski's going to be in front trying to tip shots. Kane or Hertl they're also going to be around the net trying to create traffic. And then when you look up top, on the side, on the half wall, you have Couture somewhere on the left or the right, whatever the case may be. And then you got to figure out what to do with the 2 defensemen, right? With Karlsson, with his elite passing ability, you would assume that they would try to set up, as you mentioned, a situation where he's just feeding Burns shots day after day, moment after moment, trying to get that Ovechkin thing going. But I wonder if they've tried it in practice and it hasn't worked, or what the case may be there, or I don't know. We'll see what happens. Like this is a topic where things are so fluid right now in the early going. Like, power play isn't something you really figured out, and I mean, even with Toronto, the pace that they're at, maybe teams figure them out, and all of a sudden their 7 in 7 games was a thing of the past.
Yeah, Toronto had 2 really good units last year. I'm trying to remember exactly the way they ran them, but if and when they get Nylander signed, like, I know we're talking about the current situation, but to me, that adding that second right shot player just gives them a few more options than they have with the current configuration. Although, not to take anything away from the current group, and at some point there's almost just an overabundance of riches thing happening when you've got Marner and Matthews and Tavares. That's just it's just such a talented group. You expect them for them to work it out to in some fashion, however it is that they end up working it out. I love the Leafs group. I don't even know what to say about them that hasn't been said elsewhere, because and Riley's having such a great start to the year and really excelling in that role up at the top. I think the thing I like about them is because they have so much skill that's well suited to playing down low, they don't over rely on playing from the point the way, and I haven't seen enough San Jose power play time this year, to be honest, to say that this is what's happening. But when I see Burns and Karlsson together, I worry that they're going to over-focus on generating things from the point. And I think any group that does that is going to run into trouble, whereas Toronto is so clearly their talent is down low, and they can focus on those low plays, which are more productive, generally speaking.
Yeah, and if we can talk about Washington again, like the one thing about them is that it just seems so easy, right? I mean, I was looking over a few of their shifts and a few of their goals, and there's barely even a celebration. Like, Backstrom will be backdoor and just slide it in, and it's like, oh, we've been doing this for years, no big deal. Like, 7th last year, and then years and years before that, they were the top power play team in the league. So it's almost like it's you would think that teams would somehow figure it out over the years, because they haven't changed their personnel too much. I mean, I know Kuznetsov has come on over the last couple of years. So has Oshie. He wasn't always with the team, but Backstrom and Ovechkin have been on that unit for years and years, and they just keep chugging along and keep putting pucks in the net.
Well, at some point, though, I mean, what do you do? Like, Ovechkin's going to kill you if he gets the puck there. But if you go to overprotect him, I mean, Backstrom is an elite playmaker, because Kuznetsov and Oshie are insanely talented. Karlsson's a guy, I like Karlsson a lot, but I kind of feel like he's sort of competent. You don't need anything more than just a competent offensive defenseman in that role. But I mean, take that away. That Backstrom, Oshie, Kuznetsov trio is going to be pure murder on any power play in the league. And if you overprotect Ovechkin, you're just going to let those guys do whatever they want. I think it's a very hard thing to defend, because you kind of have to pick your poison, whether you let those three get away with murder or you let Ovechkin do his thing, and we know what happens when he does his thing.
And I know that Winnipeg wasn't necessarily part of the question, but we're going to go off the trail a little bit, because you did bring them up. Like, do you see them being almost like the I don't know, Capitals 2.0 or something, like where line A is the focal point, and there's guys elsewhere on the power play that can benefit when penalty kills focus maybe a little too much on that trigger man?
Well, yeah, I love the Jets, and so much of their talent is young that Lene is going to be that guy for the next decade, right? And you cannot do too much with him, because again, Scheifele, Connor, Wheeler, those guys are going to kill you if you go overboard defending against Patrick Laine. Dustin Byfuglien's, I mean, Wheeler too, but to me, the older parts of that unit, where you have Wheeler in the net front role and Byfuglien at the point, those are the guys that you might be able to replace down the line. Not that you're going to replace Wheeler with an identical talent, but maybe you don't need to in that net front role. And if you replace Byfuglien with say Jacob Trouba or Josh Morrissey or whoever, then maybe that just makes your power play more dangerous, because the defenseman there is less focused on firing bombs from the point and more focused on supporting the down low plays. To me, though, it really does go back to Laine. If you have an Ovechkin, if you have a Laine, if you have, I'm trying to think, maybe Steven Stamkos, I guess, is the other guy you could put in that conversation too. Those are such unique talents that if you can't build a high-end power play around them, you're not doing it right. You shouldn't be coaching. I
mean, we're not even going to touch the Edmonton power play in terms of breaking it down, because you mentioned all those guys, and it's like, well, you also have Connor McDavid in Edmonton. But anyways, but moving on. Let's do a fourth game here. I'm calling it gut take. So I just want your gut opinion about this. Not necessarily rhyme off any numbers or have any sort of pie in the sky objective analysis. Like, just tell me what you think. What are the playoff chances for the Buffalo Sabres after you've seen their first 6 games? They're 3-3, so they're right down the middle. Like, are you confident about this team, or are you just, are you low on them?
I'm probably low. I'm not sure what the official over-under line is. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team. I love Rasmus Dahlin. I'm not. I like Rasmus Ristolainen too. I'm sorry. I don't know how much analysis I'm supposed to do here. I don't think that they have enough. As much as I love Jack Eichel, who is the man, and I really like the Jeff Skinner edition and some of the other editions. I don't like enough of what they have up front, and I don't think the decor is good enough to compensate. I don't think the roster's there yet.
Yeah, I think we all, as a hockey community, overreact a little bit. Like, they had a great summer.
Yeah.
I mean, if they still had Ryan O'Reilly, I think they'd be a better team. But nevertheless, they, getting Jeff Skinner, obviously getting Dahlin, the emergence of Casey Middlestat as a guy who everyone believes is going to be, at worst, a solid second-line center, but probably better than that. Even Connor Sheary, very, very good move to pick him up as a winger. I think, but we all forgot that, like, this team not that long ago was, like, historically bad, right? They haven't necessarily made these giant gains each season. They've sort of, like, chugged along a little bit, like incremental gains, but, like, it's not like last season they were on the cusp of making the playoffs, right? 62 points, so they would need at least a 30 point improvement to make the playoffs, based on sort of that mark of 95 or at least 90 to get in. So I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I think I got a little too excited about what they were doing and forgot that, even if we just focus on the back end, like, after Dahlin, after Ristolainen, it's pretty bare there. So, like, those two guys can't carry a team, especially as Dahlin gets acclimated to the NHL, and he's looked pretty good so far. Like, that first game, the 7-0 loss to Boston there, not pretty, but here we are. I don't know. I think it's just they dug themselves such a deep hole in Buffalo that I find it very, very difficult to envision them playing postseason hockey, especially when you look at the Eastern Conference and go through the teams that are probably gonna be there.
Yeah, and you look at their young core. I mean, I know it feels like the Sabres have been rebuilding forever, but if you look at the guys who are going to drive results, to me it's Eichel and Dahlin off the top, and then maybe you toss in Reinhart, Ristolainen, and Middlestat. Like, those are, with the exception of Reinhart and Ristolainen, who to me are kind of the second tier guys in that core group. Like, Eichel's 21, Middlestat's 19, Dahlin's 18. This is a very, very young core. They've done a good job, I think, of adding supporting cast members, but I mean, there really is only so much you can do in one summer, and I think the objective has to be really competitive by the second and third years of Dahlin and Middlestat's entry-level contracts, because they're just the ground was so scorched that it's going to take that long for stuff to grow back.
When I remember being in Buffalo, this must have been towards the end of last year. I can't remember exactly what month, but being there and the state that they were in, considering, they had a new GM, Jason Botterill, they had a new coach, Phil Housley. Like, there was a lot of optimism at the start of last year too, and then by the end of the year, it was all zapped out of them. Getting Dahlin, winning the lottery was obviously massive in terms of lifting their spirits and just sending the team in a different direction. But there was a point not that long ago where we were even going, like, how are they going to figure this out? So, again, I think that we all kind of got caught up, and maybe I'm looping too many people in this saying we all, but, like, I feel like a lot of people were pretty excited about this team, and maybe we need to dial it back. Maybe we don't. I don't know. Like, at the end of the day, they do have Jack Eichel, who we assume is going to be a top player in this league and already is a star. Is he going to become a superstar? I guess we might find out by the end of the season.
Well, you mentioned Jack Eichel. I'd kind of put him. he's a center, so it's a little bit different. But I'd kind of put him in the same skills category as Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall's a tremendous talent. It didn't, his presence on the Edmonton roster didn't stop the Oilers from spinning their wheels for years and years and years, though. There's only so much one guy can do, and there's a lot of ground to retake. And now that I've said that, they're going to win 7 of their next 10 or something ridiculous. But it is still a very young group, and the point that they're coming from so far back is not something that can be ignored.
Yeah, and this is the way I had it shaking down in the East before the season started. I thought, Tampa, Toronto, Boston are locks in the Atlantic, and I thought Florida slides in either first or second wild card. And then when you go to the Metro, I thought Pittsburgh, Washington, Philly, and Columbus in whatever order make it. So, if I look at the Buffalo Sabres and their roster and how they've looked so far, and again, it's early, but when I look at them, I don't even think about them in the same conversation as those 8 teams. So unless, I don't know, Philly encounters a ton of injuries, or Columbus implodes with what's going on with Panarin and Bobrovsky with their contracts coming up and the possibility of them shipping them out, like, unless something crazy like that happens, I don't see them even being close to those 8 teams. I see a big gap there, and there's some other teams also in sort of the Sabres realm. One last question before we move on from the Sabres, and it's kind of a depressing question now that we've talked about how we don't think highly of them so much this year. Can you put a percentage on their chances of making the playoffs?
Off the top of my head, 25-30%. Like it's going to sound silly because Carolina and New Jersey are off to such strong starts, but they're kind of in that range to me going into the year with Carolina and Jersey and Florida, where you're sort of gunning for those last 2 wild card spots. And if you figure they're one of 4 teams with a shot at one wild card slot, maybe 25%, and maybe the odds going in were a little bit better than that, but you dock them a little bit because they're off to sort of a mediocre beginning.
Okay, that's fair. 25, I think that's actually that's a fair percentage to give them. I thought you were going to go lower than that.
I might even be underrating the level of chaos there is in the league. I know whenever Dom Lucian does his season preview stuff, he's always making the point that there's a huge range of possible outcomes. Like, I mean, New Jersey and Colorado making the playoffs last year. So, yeah, 25%. I might even be being a little bit conservative there.
Yeah, who do you think would be that team that, you mentioned New Jersey and Colorado of last year, where I wouldn't say that they like completely came out of nowhere, but people weren't saying, oh, that's 100% a playoff team. Like they stretched, they overachieved. Do you have one team across the league that you're looking at right now going that it might be them this year?
I kind of had my eye on Carolina and Arizona coming into the season, and they've gone very different directions. Arizona's a very interesting story that nobody cares about because there just aren't that many Coyotes fans. But those were the 2 teams I had my eye on for like maybe making massive improvements year over year.
Yeah, I don't think they've scored as we record here, I don't think they've scored a 5-on-5 goal. So, I mean, I know their underlying numbers have been impressive, and, considering the start of the season, and where we are at, like in October, you want the process over the results. So, I mean, the Coyotes and their, like you said, small fan base, they can't be worrying too much, but I mean, can they catch a break? Can they catch a break? Like they can't score 1 5-on-5 goal.
Well, and you get off to a 1-4 start, and I hate to say it, but that's a steep hole. It sounds ridiculous to say, well, 5 games in, they're in a hole that they're going to have trouble climbing out of, but it's true. They're 3 games under 500. They're, you can make up that ground if you get on the ball early enough, but you combine that start with what they showed last year, and it just tells me that maybe my sort of dark horse optimism was misplaced there.
Yeah, and they've run into some injuries, so it again, Arizona hard to figure out. Like they just, I feel like we haven't seen their real self this year, last year. We'll see what happens down the road. Like they're not a complete team by any means. So I guess the jury's out in general, but yeah, something to monitor. Okay. Final game. This one is pretty open-ended, and I'm not really sure where it's going to go, but here we go. So you're Gary Bettman for 24 hours. What would your first order of business be if you were granted the commissioner's duties?
Okay, so I had a question about this one. When I'm Gary Bettman for a day, am I looking at what Gary Bettman could realistically do in his position, or am I sort of king of the NHL where I can do whatever I want and not worry about the owners getting mad at me?
Yeah, either. Why don't you give me one of each?
Okay. If I'm actually Gary Bettman, I think, and I hate to do this because it's a little bit depressing for a hockey podcast, but I think the first thing I would do would focus on creating a definitive NHL domestic violence policy. I think we're at a point now where we've seen social issues become outsized in terms of how much they impact sports. Like, this stuff happened all the time in the 50s and 60s, and it just kind of got hushed up and ignored. But you're at a point now where people expect leagues to do things about this, and having a definite policy as opposed to just kind of doing an ad hoc process on a case-by-case basis. Having a definitive policy means that everybody knows what the standard is. The league has a definitive place where they say this is what the rules are, and it lets you consult with experts and have this built-up bank of knowledge and resources before you make a decision on something as controversial as Austin Watson. Or when it gets appealed, it lets you make an argument and say, well, this is what the rules were, this is what we're grading him on, and it seems a lot more transparent. And in this day and age, I think that's a really important thing for any sports league, and most sports leagues have already done this.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And I think just in general, if you're the commissioner, and I realize that he has to juggle a million different personalities and perspectives and everything, and a lot of it comes down to the owners and how they feel. But you want to be on the right side of history, right? So
yeah.
With the concussion situation, they're already on the wrong side because they've been either denying it outright or saying, we're skeptical. With domestic violence, they could make a stand sooner than later, right? So
well, and when something like this comes up, do you want to be in the position of saying, I, Gary Bettman from on high, have handed down my personal judgment on this decision? Or do you want to be in a position where you're saying, look, we consulted with the experts, these are our rules, these are our procedures, and I am just following this based on the best advice I could get? I'd much rather be in the second position myself.
Yeah. What was your second? What was your second? Probably less serious, I would assume.
Okay. Well, I have another somewhat serious one. But,
let's hear it.
Oh, just I love the international rule of outlawing any hit to the head. You can't hit a guy in the head. Period. There's a lot of stuff I don't like about international hockey. To me, given what we know about concussions, given what we've learned over the past 10, 15 years. I think it's a no-brainer. You just make it so any hit to the head is an automatic penalty, and players will, react to those incentives.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the NHL is pretty firm in their they've slowly updated the rule book. They've slowly come around and the Tom Wilson suspension was I mean, even though he was a repeat offender and it was kind of easy to throw the book at him, they might not have, right? So they decided to make the to give him the stiff punishment. So you assume that they're going in the right direction with that. Mike Matheson getting a couple games. I mean, maybe some people wanted more, but in the past, I think they would have looked the other way. But the fact that the IIHF does have that rule and the NHL could more or less steal it doesn't sound like a terrible idea. On that topic of penalties and punishment. My thought was it'd be great if penalties never ran out. If you got a penalty for 2 minutes, you're in the box for 2 minutes, the team can score 1,000 goals. If we're talking about all this stuff like reducing goalie equipment, which there's a threshold there, right? Like, these guys need to be protected, and I don't think it's there yet, but it's going to be there at some point. I remember I was at the rink earlier this season, and I was looking at Malcolm Subban of the Vegas Golden Knights, and I'm like, this guy. Like, there's barely any pads anymore. And so you hope that it's sort of it stops at some point. And I don't really want them to make the nets bigger. That's a little goofy. I think, you get a penalty, you sit in the box for your amount of time. Maybe it becomes a 90-second penalty or something like that, but I think that'd be fun. I think it'd spice things up. And the way power plays are going last year, this year, it seems like goal rates are up. It seems like teams have figured out, maybe it's just, the skill level in general has been raised. But if we want scoring up, I think that if we attack the penalty kill power play dynamic, we might see a bit of an uptick.
Yeah, that was actually on my list too. And I think the reason, if I remember correctly, I've always understood this. I've never actually done the research to check if it's true, so maybe I'm perpetuating the mythology here. But my understanding was that the reason the league took away the they had the penalties canceled when the other team scored a goal was because of the mid-'80s Oilers and just how insanely potent their power play was. And having guys stuck in the box for a full 2 minutes every time was just too much. And I look at that and I think to myself, what would the league kill for right now? They would really kill for a team like the mid-'80s Oilers, wouldn't they? I mean, not necessarily in Edmonton, make it Pittsburgh or Tampa Bay or wherever you want, but it showcases skill. It ramps up the cost associated with playing illegally. I think those are both really good outcomes from an NHL perspective. Driving up scoring is a great outcome from an NHL perspective. And I think what a lot of people forget is in 05-06, when scoring really peaked in the sort of lockout era, it was mostly because there were so many power plays. Like the interference crackdown, yes, it opened up the game and created stuff, but teams were on the man advantage a ton, and scoring responded to that.
I can hear your baby in the background. I think I need to let you go soon.
He's yelling from the other room. He's at the far end of the house and he's yelling. So
okay, well, I'm gonna just ask you one last question on the topic of Gary Bettman. He's gonna be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame next month. In my opinion, it doesn't make a ton of sense. The timing, in general, of course, he's a Hall of Famer. I think anyone who's disagreeing with that sentiment is not paying attention. Like, I understand that people dislike him for this or that reason, but he's been under the league's been under his watch for 25 years, and look how it's grown. Look at all the things that he's done to allow the NHL to flourish. But anyways, to get back to the original question, what do you think of the timing? Because one, he's not retired, and two, he's still commissioner. Like, I just feel like it's almost like a conflict of interest to an extent.
Yeah, if I was the commissioner, well, this is easy for me to say because this isn't happening, but if I was the commissioner, I wouldn't want to be inducted while I was still commissioner. I would say the optics of that are terrible. I shouldn't be under consideration. When I retire, sure, but not when I'm still in the job. I don't think there's any question that he belongs in there at some point, given the way the Hall of Fame is currently constructed. You can argue whether his impact on the game has been good or bad or whatever, but he's an outsized figure in NHL history. The modern game is where it is for good and for bad, in large part because Gary Bettman was the guy at the helm. And he certainly belongs in there, but I agree entirely on the timing. You don't want somebody who's actively in the role going into the Hall of Fame. It makes it look too much like the hockey historians, the people who are responsible for the long-term view of the game, kind of selling out to the people in charge in the moment. I don't like phrasing it like that because I don't want to impute motives to anybody, but that's just what the optics, I think, are, and I don't think it's great.
I just don't get it. Like, why not wait a few years? Because it's not like he's 50 years old and it's going to be another 15, 20 years before he retires. Like, he's probably going to retire within, I don't know, the next 5-10 years. So what's wrong with waiting? I don't know. Maybe there is an answer out there, and we just need to talk to the right people. But I know that the Hall of Fame is also quite tight-lipped about how things operate. So who knows?
Which is ridiculous in and of itself, right? Like, these guys are it's almost like they're given a trust for hockey fans generally to say, this is what these are the. I know that's not explicitly their role, but that's the way it is. Like, we don't all get to vote on who the greatest players of all time are, who the great builders of all time are. It's confined to the Hockey Hall of Fame committee. And to me, It should be. They should do what the PHWA did this past season, where they moved to make their awards process more transparent, because they are carrying out a public trust, and so the process should be clearly visible to the public. And if that causes you embarrassment as a voter, well, you shouldn't be voting.
Yeah, I just picture, like, since it's so secretive, I just picture them all being in a boardroom, like, just very serious and, like, deliberating for hours, but also it being very, like, don't, say a peep to anyone, like all these speeches about secrecy. And I don't know, I feel like it just seems more, I don't know, stuck in a different era. Like we're in an era where people want to know these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like they're passing around a cup and putting white and black beans in it, right? Like this is something that the more public roles like this can be, the better, I think. Especially, I mean, it's not like we're talking something where there are hugely entrenched interests. We're not talking the papal elections. We're not talking the presidency. We're talking about the Hockey Hall of Fame. Surely you can open that up to fans and let them in. Be inclusive of them in terms of the arguments and discussions over the merits of various players.
All right, John. Very, very fun talking to you. Thanks for entertaining this game show like Round the Horn format. I guess before I let you go, how can people find your work and what are you working on? Anything you want to plug?
I've been sick as death for about 3 days, so I don't have anything that's really imminent. But follow me on Twitter at Jonathan Willis. I put up all my stories there. Subscribe to The Athletic if you haven't. My stuff's all there, but Pierre LeBrun, James Myrtle, Craig Custance, Corey Pronman, there's a ton of really great journalists there, and you get everything for $5 a month or whatever it is. So that's where to find me.
All right, John. Thanks again.
Thanks, John.
Cool. I'll let you go,
stuff.
man. Yeah. Thanks for coming on, especially because you're a little sick. That kind of sucks.